If I gave you a blank sheet of paper and a pen right now and told you to just make something, anything, how would you feel? I imagine that some people in this room might immediately sculpt an airplane or draw a family of robots or something. But I also imagine that some of us might feel a little stuck. And that's totally normal, because making something without any directives, any constraints, can feel kind of overwhelming. Placing boundaries around what we intend to make helps us imagine and build. And there are lots of examples in how this plays out. Artist Michael Johansson, for example, places found objects in unexpected places in a process that he likes to call real-life Tetris. At the same time, lots of people have asked themselves, can I make a prosthetic limb entirely out of Legos? And the answer is yes. Yes, you absolutely can. And then there's artist Mark Johns, who made an entire series of drawings on Post-it notes. He says that it helps him keep the drawings simple and the concept focused. But today, I don't want to focus on the constraints that we choose for ourselves for our own inspiration. I want to talk about the ones we'd rather avoid, those day-to-day ones, because we don't always get to pick the constraints that we face. But even when things are less than ideal, there's almost always a way forward. The secret comes from moving from a mindset of scarcity, which says, I don't have what I need, to one of abundance, which asks, what do I already have that could be unexpectedly wonderful? And when we learn to do that, it can lead us in some amazing directions. See, I believe that every act of creation is a unique extension of the person making it. And that means that everything that makes us who we are, not only our talents, but our limitations, is part of the gift that we have to offer the world. In my own experience, many of the things I've been able to make over the past several years never would have happened if I'd waited for all my limitations to resolve themselves. In fact, some of them might always be with me, but I have learned to embrace them. I've been thinking and talking about creativity for a long time, which means that I've also been listening for a long time. And when I ask people about what's holding them back from making what they dream of making, I see patterns in their answers. So today, I want to share some stories about some of the most common constraints that come up. And I hope that they'll inspire you to look at the limits in your own life with an eye for abundance. At the outset of any creative endeavor, it's easy to feel constrained by the materials or tools that we don't have. And I get it. If your dream is to become a welder, it's hard to realize that if you don't have a blowtorch. But maybe in the meantime, while you're saving up for that blowtorch, you could make something amazing out of what's right in front of you. And sometimes when you do that, it can open up all kinds of possibilities. I say this from experience. I've been drawing since I was very tiny, but until very recently, I never thought of it as something that I could do professionally. But one day I was having a conversation with my friend Salim about how we both wanted to be less perfectionist about the work we were putting out in the world. And so we agreed that we would draw every day and put it on the internet, starting on the first of the year. So New Year's Day rolls around, it's 11 p.m., I've completely forgotten about my promise, and so I start frantically looking around my house, trying to find something to start with. All the stores were closed, it was too late to go get anything fancy, but I looked over at my desk and I saw a stack of business cards that I'd saved from grad school. And they suddenly morphed into a bunch of little canvases. And thus began what I like to call the Biz Card Project. And basically, I drew on the back of one of those cards every day and put it on Instagram. The only rules were that I had to use a pen and I couldn't start over. So some days, the inspiration came from whimsy. So thinking about what would happen if an octopus lived on land and had to take a dip in the ocean for the first time. Another day, I got inspired by an ottoman that I bought at Target and made a similar pattern. And one day, I got a song stuck in my head. And as it turns out, if you sing Karma Chameleon to yourself a whole bunch of times, it turns into comma, 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 chameleon. And so once I started sharing these imperfect drawings, it turned out that other people started paying attention. And it led to a lot of things, everything from my first artistic commission to an ongoing series of collaborations with other artists. And moreover, when people saw these random, messy drawings that I put out into the world, they took it as permission to go ahead and take their own creative risks. So in that first frantic moment of trying to figure out what I could do with what was in my house, I found all kinds of abundance. And from there, I was on a roll. I started drawing on all kinds of other things that I had on hand in a series called Mailande Things. Everything from a toilet paper roll to my friend Justin's face to a cardiology printout. And as you can see, the patterns in the latter ended up informing a client project not long after. And so this sort of practice of just using what I had ended up bringing up a lot of new opportunities for me. And it's not just me either. My friend Marianne Bailey, when she was starting to draw, starting her new practice, she had a really demanding job. So she started drawing with Sharpies and copy paper that she had at the office. And this is what she's making today. Of course, you don't have to draw something to create. There are all kinds of things to make: organizations, networks, programs. The list is endless. A few years ago, I was teaching in Kyrgyzstan. And like most people who are involved in the education system in one way or the other, I wanted badly to do something to help address the problems that I saw my students facing, even once I was out of the classroom. And my teaching partner David and I weren't exactly poised to bring about a revolution in education in Kyrgyzstan. But we did have something really important, which was a network of trusted friends who shared our passion for education. We'd also seen in the classroom the transformative power of technology as we watched our students interact with David's tablet between lesson breaks. So we thought to ourselves, and we came up with a plan to supply our students and a classroom nearby with a set of used iPads. And in doing so, we drew on a lot of connections. As it happens, getting a set of used iPads to a Kyrgyz school in the middle of nowhere takes a lot. So we called on the following people: our family and friends in the States, who generously donated to the effort; our friend Turo Keldi, who went into the market in the capital and haggled to find the best prices on used electronics; our friend Shamil, a taxi driver, who took them from the capital to a smaller city called Talas near the village; our friend Saltanat, who took them from Talas to the village; and our fellow teacher Dinara Ece, who kept them safe in her classroom with her students. This, to our knowledge, is the first tablet classroom in a Kyrgyz village school. And 5 years later, these iPads are still in constant use. So even though David and I faced some limitations, we were still able to make positive, lasting change with what we had. Speaking of making things in faraway places, sometimes it's easy to think that if we could be in a different office or a different city, we could finally step into ourselves as creators. And I get it. We're sold this idea that if we don't have like a perfect studio with white walls somewhere, or that one bedroom on that cute corner in Manhattan, we're missing out. But the truth is, it would be boring if all of human creation came from the same place. And there's something amazing about being able to see where you are in a different light. This is Pontocho Alley in Kyoto, Japan. If you slip off to the left, you'll find Bar Bunkyu, which is situated in a dark room at the end of an alley. And inside, you'll find one gorgeously carved table and a bartender named Nao, who is very friendly and knowledgeable. When my friends and I visited this bar, we ended up talking with Nao for hours, finding out about where he lived and why, what he loved and why. And about halfway through, he looked at us and asked if we'd like to know what he was really passionate about. And of course, we said yes. So Nao pulled out a series of these laminated photo holders, like the kind you'd put printed photos back in the day when people did that. And inside were handwritten lists of places all around the world. Turns out, Nao uses his place at this table in a dark room in Kyoto to create an index of the world's most beloved places. He asks everyone who comes in where they're from, what they love about it, and where they'd send new visitors. And so he has created this collection, and he told me that, in his opinion, the places we love make up our lives. And when we share those places, we share our lives with each other. As it turned out, there was already a card for Durham, North Carolina, but I did take the opportunity to make an update, so now there are two. Another example of finding abundance in the place where you are is a project called Casablanca, Not the Movie, by an artist named Yorius. He grew up and still lives in Casablanca, Morocco, and he uses his familiarity with the place and his ingenuity to find these instances of coincidence and idiosyncrasy in the world around him. This is partially a counterpoint to the movie Casablanca, which was never filmed on site, only in a studio. But I mention Yorius because he's been able to look around in the place he was born and find these amazing things to share. He didn't have to jet off to another exotic location. And then, remember my friend Marian with the Sharpies and the copy paper? Her job requires a lot of air travel, and she found that being on a plane with no Wi-Fi and distractions was actually the perfect time for her to practice her doodles. And thus, she created a constraint into her own private creative lab. And of course, surrounding everything we've been talking about so far is time. And it's one of those challenges, it's just uniquely human, trying to manage it. But instead of lamenting about what we would do if we had more time, which is very easy for me to do, we've got to learn to figure out what to do with what we have. Earlier this year, I received my first invitation to show a body of visual work in a public venue, which was really exciting. I didn't have anything on hand to show at the time, but I promised the owners of the space that I would be able to make something for them by the deadline. And as it turned out, a lot of unexpected things happened, and I had 3 days to make what I would have really liked to do over the course of a month. So I canceled everything for one weekend, managed to push my client work off for one additional day, and was like, okay, I got these 72 hours to make something. And then during that time, as it turned out, I started experiencing a bunch of PTSD symptoms, like panic attacks and flashbacks, super fun stuff that I'd been struggling with for a while. And so I thought to myself, what is this? I'm running out of time. I don't know how to finish this. I don't know how to work with this. And in the end, I had no choice but to just embrace what was happening and use that as material for my work. And so my brain is here. It's telling me, it's making me relive things I don't want to relive, making doomsday comments about life in general, and fracturing my sense of who I am. And I was able to use that in order to make art like this. And this. And as it turned out, making this stuff was incredibly healing for me, the process itself. And then when I shared it, it gave other people the opportunity to share their experiences with me, and we both found a lot of comfort in that. And that leads me to one of the most universal constraints, which is fear, a totally normal thing that humans experience anytime we venture into the unknown. And it's there to keep us safe, but the problem is that it goes overboard, and it tries to limit us and keep us small when we really don't need to be. As my friend Amber Ray says, the aim is not to undo our response to fear or to try to change it. It's to welcome it and learn how to have a relationship with it. It's to see fear as a reminder that we are alive. And in that way, fear can be a positive thing, because it's telling us that we really care about whatever we're afraid of. And that is a reminder that we can be a little more gentle, more encouraging with ourselves. And in that light, I have some suggestions that I've gathered over time about how to create alongside fear. The first suggestion is to keep the stakes low. The very first drawing I ever put up in a gallery was part of a community show where anything you submitted would be accepted. And by clearing that low hurdle, I was able to pave the way for putting stuff up in public spaces in the future. And it actually ended up being the first piece I ever sold. Secondly, tell everyone you're going to do it. I found that often our desire to keep our word can override whatever is making us scared. Thirdly, and I do this all the time, remember what the cartoonist Tom Hart's friend Brian said to him when Tom was freaking out about starting a new project. Nobody's watching and nobody cares. Which is not always literally true, to be fair, but the point is that other people are more interested in what they're doing than whatever you're up to. And so you have some grace while you're figuring it out. And lastly, just remember that you can't please everyone. It's completely impossible. And the people that make up your true audience will understand what you're up to. All of this matters to me because I've seen what's possible when we give ourselves permission to make something real out of that vibrant life force inside of us. Even when everything isn't perfect, even when everything is kind of awful. The constraints I've faced have been pretty instructive, everything from debilitating chronic fatigue that made me narrow my lens to the panic attacks that showed up when I would have given anything to think about anything else. But I have learned to embrace them, and it really has opened up opportunities for me that have been completely unexpected. But if you're having some trouble finding the abundance in front of you, here are some questions that might help coax it out of hiding. First, what can you make out of what's right in front of you, even if it's not what you wish you had? Second, what places or people do you have access to that others might not, and how can they inform what you make? Thirdly, what are you bad at? In other words, what do you struggle with? And how can that help you gain empathy and perspective? And finally, what can you not stop thinking about? And how can your ideas and stories about that thing help other people? We all have our own unique sets of constraints. And these questions are meant to help you focus on what you do have instead of worrying about what you don't. The limits that we face can feel stifling, but they also help make us who we are. And they're part of the gifts that we have to offer. It's up to us to look around, take stock of what we have, and turn those barriers into new paths forward, to use what we've got. Thank you.